Well, good morning. Welcome back to the Broadcast Retirement Network. I'm Jeff Snyder. This is BRN Sunday for Sunday, July 25th, 2021. We've got another great show this week. I'll be joined by members of the media, academia, and financial services as we analyze all the news in financial wellness, healthcare, tech, and so much more. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode of BRN Sunday. Well, let's kick things off with a look at what's going on the legislative front, litigation front, and the regulatory front. And here to break that down, they're known as the Legal Eagles, but they're also known as David Levine, Kevin Walsh, who are principals with Groom Law Group, an employee benefits law firm based in Washington, D.C. Eagles, great to talk to you. Thanks so much for flying in and joining us this morning.
Thanks for having us on. I feel sometimes as though when we look at the different weeks, we seem to do the same things a couple times. This week, we're going to do something different. But even then, talking about a new topic, there's new regs that came out. It feels like we may have just talked about them because, the way that regs get issued, they always seem to be an outgrowth of a prior iteration.
Yeah. David, you want to break it down for us? New EPCRS guidance from the Internal Revenue Service, our best friends.
Absolutely, Jeff. I'm going to break it down and I'm going to put it to a beatbox rap and see if it can be interesting. But there's a couple of things. I'm not capable of that, and you really don't want to hear it.
Well, we might lose an audience. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Exactly. Hey, I don't take offense. You're 100% right. So the Employee Plans Compliance Resolution System is something that the IRS has had around for nearly 30 years in different iterations. What is it? It's a program that allows you to correct errors, whether it is through self-correction, so you don't even have to tell the IRS, usually, or you go into the IRS, the voluntary compliance program, or it's on audit cap. You don't want to be caught in audit, but there's a correction process for that too. Most people are really focused on just being proactive and dealing with correction when they find it. So what does that mean? Well, the IRS many years ago bundled all their correction procedures into one big program, EPCRS, EPCRS, people call it different terms. And the key thing is they update it every so often. The last update was in 2019. This update's in 2021. So what's really different in the 2021 version? Well, let's talk about a couple things just to lay out where we're going to go as a roadmap today. First, there are changes on overpayments, which is something that is always a hot topic. There's legislation out there that's been proposed. In fact, I know Kevin, myself, others at the firm have worked on language that sort of is reflected in that legislation, especially in pension plans where people get overpaid for many years and then they're like suddenly, oops, you got a bunch too much, but we don't want to hurt you, but we have duties to collect this money. What do we do? Overpayments is one area. Then also the ability to amend the plan retroactively. In other words, there's been an evolution of the system over the years where the IRS has increasingly allowed people to amend to make corrections. We'll talk about that briefly. And then the last item that's really out there is probably what I view as a little bit of a negative, a change in your ability to come in anonymously. So let me try to hit these really fast. Overpayment, it's a big deal. Everybody knows imperfections happen, mistakes happen, and the courts have even said we recognize that. It doesn't mean it's a fiduciary breach. But why do we care? Well, if you have to collect overpayments from someone who's been getting $1,000 a month, and you suddenly say you're going to be cut to $50, I don't think anybody likes doing that, but they feel like they need to preserve the assets of the plan for everybody. Mm-hmm. So it becomes a balancing act. What do you do? The IRS has come up with some relief that is basically says, well, if your plan is well funded in certain other scenarios, hey, you can do limited things on the overpayment and you don't need to basically break the bank on people, and they'll consider it as still being compliant. Congress has other items on overpayment, as I mentioned, pending, and I think this is a good start. I definitely think there's room to grow on this, but I think that's something that we will see more about as we go forward. So that's number one. Number two, the IRS allows you to correct in self-correction for certain things by doing an amendment. That was a huge improvement 2 years ago. The IRS is actually basically expanded that because before you had to basically make sure it covered everybody in the plan. Now there's more wiggle room that maybe you can do a little bit more rifle shot. Still, you can't discriminate, and the IRS is not giving a free pass just to make things up, but it's good. I'm actually going to add in a 2.5. A 2.5 is the IRS also extended some of its prior relief for where you failed to do things like contributions and elections. We can get into the weeds, but time is short. Short answer is continued relief. And then the last thing, which is something that always makes me pause a little. The IRS has had a great program where over the years you can come in and you can file anonymously. Why would you do that? Because some corrections, the IRS has appendices at the back of EPCRS that say, oh, here's a standard correction. But a lot of the times, especially just in bigger plans or just complex plans, mistakes happen and there's not an easy sort of off-the-shelf fix. People get nervous about that, especially if the cost could be really high, because even though the IRS is very friendly in this program, the 3 letters of IRS do scare people. And because of that, they like to come in anonymously and say, here's my proposal, because they're afraid that the IRS will tell them you need to pay $10 million when it could be $100,000. We understand that. And the anonymous program was a really great feature of this. But starting next year, you won't be able to file anonymously. You'll be able to do a pre-submission conference and talk to the IRS where you can come in, so that way you can get a feel before you put yourself sort of into the IRS's hands. But I know for some folks, whether it's union plans where there's limited resources to collect money, or governmental plans where there's a lot of different considerations that are more than just a single employer, I think it's a concern. I hope that the IRS reconsiders at some point, but it's a positive item. That's a brief overview. Mr. Walsh, what do you have to add?
Yeah, David, I mean, I think you kind of hit everything on that one. I think the key with it is that, when you run a retirement plan, you do the best you can. And I think there's a goal that everyone will be in full compliance all the time. But it's nice that the IRS has come out with guidance that says, nobody's perfect, and that they're willing to work with folks to get back into compliance.
Yeah,
well,
and
Kevin,
go ahead,
Kevin,
Kev. Go ahead, Dave.
I gotta say, that statement was perfect, Kevin.
Oh,
Thank you, David.
I love the puns. Last question, gentlemen. This is really guidance for plan sponsors, employers, and their attorneys to digest. Will Groom Law be putting together a brief to explain this in greater detail? Because we've only covered it for 7.5 minutes or so.
We absolutely have, and it will be on our website soon. We're going over it. And in fact, one more note to make, plan sponsors are a key part of this, but also don't forget, service providers have system errors sometimes, and this program works for them too. So it's not just for plan sponsors, but
Yeah.
Absolutely. And thanks for the plug, Jeff.
Absolutely. Hey, look, I do what I can. That's www.groom.com. Right, gentlemen?
Yeah.
Groom.com.
Because if you say Groom Law, that's actually another law firm. So we appreciate you saying groom.com.
Okay, groom.com. All right, gents, we're going to leave it there. Thanks again for stopping by twice, and look forward to having you on again next weekend.
Thanks for the time. Thanks,
Jeff.
listeners.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Welcome back. Now time to talk technology. Joining us on the line, he is lead advisor, executive producer for 7 Investing. We're talking about Daniel Klein. Dan, welcome back to the program. Great to talk to you this morning.
Oh, great to have you, Jeff. Joining you today back at home in West Palm Beach. I think I was in Alabama last week when we did the show.
Okay, well, I hope you had a fun time in Alabama. Although I do know, I think I read that they have an uptick of COVID. Am I mistaken about that?
No, it's the lowest vaccination state, but I was in Birmingham, which is very much an oasis. It's a little bit of a progressive city in the middle of a not so progressive state. It was actually a lovely place. I'm happy to go back there at some point when there's no longer a raging virus around the country.
Yeah, that seems like it's important to consider. All right, Dan, let's talk about Netflix. 209, I think, million subscribers, if I'm not mistaken, if I quote that number correctly. You'll correct me if I'm wrong. But they are now moving from TV, movies, content to gaming. Interesting.
Yeah, this is dumb.
So tell us how you really feel, Dan.
So, Jeff, here's the problem. I pay for the Apple subscription bundle. So I have Apple News, which I use because a lot of the magazines I read back when they were actually magazines are in there, like Rolling Stone and Entertainment Weekly. I don't really use the fitness, but I do tie it into my Apple Watch, so I guess I use it a little. And I get the Apple Arcade as part of this. And I spent 2 or 3 times, maybe a half hour rooting around the Apple Arcade, and I downloaded a couple of games, and I played them for less than 3 minutes, and then I never thought about it again. Well, if you're Netflix, if you're producing games, you're entering an incredibly crowded world and you don't have anything all that interesting to base it on. So if you wanted to co-develop a Stranger Things console game, an Orange is the New Black prison game, I'm not sure what that would look like, but you could. Instead, these are going to be tablet and phone games, and that space is just so unbelievably crowded. For Netflix to develop those games, it's going to cost a bunch of money, whereas the game I'm likely to play could be developed by some guy and become the latest craze. So if I'm Netflix, am I better off putting that money into supporting games on the way up, or giving interesting developers a little bit of money, and or even letting them use certain properties? I just think this is very typical for the Netflix isn't smart about content. And I know we hear all about this algorithm and how great they are. They produce a lot of crap that nobody watches. They spend $80 million on movies that their algorithm tells you people watch, but nobody are talking about them and there's no buzz. Whereas, and we've talked about this many times, every single show Disney puts out is on some level a big deal. It's something you know about. I mean, look, is the new Turner and Hooch as big as a new season of The Mandalorian? Absolutely no. But is there an audience for that clearly knows what it is, that you do a little advertising, and families sit around and watch Turner and Hooch? Well, there might be 17 police and dog shows on Netflix. I don't know. And now they're going to make tablet games? Like, it just seems like this is a company that loves to light money on fire. And I get it, they're a subscription machine, but at some point they have to become efficient, and they're not doing a good job with it.
Dan, is this a case where you go out and acquire like an Activision? I know Activision's part of Blizzard, but I'm just, hypothetical. I'm just using them as an example. Do you go out? I mean, clearly Netflix does not have the expertise, I would think, in creating games. There's a lot that goes into it, a lot of testing. Like, you have to understand the preferences of the users. But could they partner with an Activision or a Blizzard or someone like
So,
that to create a game?
so,
Games.
so, so they could. So they, I mentioned Stranger Things, but Stranger Things is probably the biggest Netflix property that would make sense to be a game. They're spending a few $100 million developing a James Bond-like movie. Well, James Bond games have traditionally been hit or miss, but some of them have been very, very good. So those are things where you go to an existing partner and you have a big hand in it and the story and how it's going to play. The problem is, as big as Netflix is, Netflix doesn't run commercials for the most part. I mean, there are sort of trailers for some of their shows, but they don't run ads for other shows in their shows. So what's the big benefit if, say, Apple has a game? Well, Apple could show you an ad for that game or serve you an ad for that game, depending where you are. Netflix doesn't really do that. So I don't really see what the synergy is here or why it makes sense. And I don't think they have that many properties that make sense for a game. And I'll give you an example. So I am, as you know, a pro wrestling fan. And the number two pro wrestling group is called All Elite Wrestling. They're on TNT. And they've invested pretty heavily in a game. Well, because they have a couple million fans, and right now there's really only one pro wrestling console game, so there's a clear market need for another. If Netflix owns something that I thought, wow, that's the next Star Wars in terms of video games, then of course maybe they should have their own game studio and go into games. But they don't have that. So, if you're Netflix and you want to take $500,000 and throw a bunch of creators 50 grand and have a games contest in the studio and get some attention, that might make sense. But to go full force into it, it just, look, I think their intentions are good. They're calling it another content category. They're not great at the content categories they're in, and this one doesn't connect to what they do. It makes very little sense to me.
Yeah, Dan, before we move off this, I have a little bit of time left, but I want to get your answer to this for about a minute. Peloton, I think, is moving into the game space as well. At least that's what I read online. Is this kind of a similar reaction to that?
No, Peloton makes more sense because Peloton's about bike riding. Bike riding lends itself to games. So the types of games Peloton are going to make are things that distract you while you're riding your bike. So it might be races, it might be obstacle courses, it might, who knows? I have a fitness product called the Stealth, which is sort of a board you lay on to do ab exercises. It's too difficult for me. But you can do different games, or you're like a hang glider and you have to go through various targets, or you're a skier and you have to go through the gates. That's the type of game Peloton could do well with because it just fits. Like, hey, I'm in the Peloton, app. I'm tired of the classes where the teachers are encouraging and annoying, and I'd like to do something where I can just be competitive. and all of a sudden a game makes sense there. So that fits really well. If Netflix came out and said it was going to build a trivia engine and have trivia games around all its most popular shows, that would make a lot more sense to me than this random, we're going to build tablet games.
Yeah, I'm not a gamer, as you know. I think that I like real-time strategy games like Command and Conquer. Dan, let's switch to Twitter having a strong, I guess, second quarter. What about subscriber growth?
Yeah, so Twitter had about an 11% growth. Why is this encouraging? Why did I point this out when it's not normally something we would talk about? Honestly, it's because so daily users, it was up 11% in the second quarter. What I was worried about is the political season has lessened. Like him or hate him or whatever, obviously Donald Trump was a driver of Twitter traffic. He is obviously not on Twitter. There was still obviously all of the political discourse, but we're in a time where we're not thinking about politics as much. We don't wake up in the morning and wonder if we invaded Canada or what interesting thing might have happened today. So that's generally pretty bad for Twitter. What else is happening? Well, we're going out more. The more people can do, maybe the less glued they would be to Twitter would go the theory. And the fact that that hasn't happened shows that Twitter is really maybe a more sticky, more powerful platform. Look, I am a big Twitter user. I would argue that FinTwit, that's financial Twitter, is kind of an oasis in what can often be a cesspool. I think that could be true for a lot of comedians you follow or sports teams where it's really not connected to the negativity that you see on a lot of social media. There's a lot of interesting financial debate. Like I threw out a poll question about which restaurant would be worth have the most stock growth in 10 years. McDonald's, Chipotle, Starbucks, and I'm forgetting the fourth one, but it doesn't matter. And a lot of people commented on it, and thousands of people voted. To me, that's going to continue, but I would have expected a bit of a pullback for Twitter. So I actually think it's pretty encouraging for that platform, which has struggled to monetize its users, that its growth is there, and then maybe it can figure out the rest of it.
Yeah, I'm not, as you know, I'm not a big Twitter user. I use primarily LinkedIn, and I certainly don't source my information from Twitter or, like news. I get it from other sources from Twitter and Facebook. Dan, what's the impact here? I think we talked last week, if I'm not mistaken, about Facebook putting money towards creators. How has Facebook responded? How has Facebook done in light of, Twitter's a competitor in some ways, in a lot of ways. Ad revenue, ad growth. There are a lot of people on Twitter, maybe a little bit less, as you just mentioned. But how does Facebook compare? That's another huge social media platform.
Yeah, I mean, Facebook obviously has its headwinds. It faces some political problems. It faces some pushback over privacy. But the reality is Facebook is a monster, and Twitter hasn't figured out how to compete. Facebook has done an incredibly good job of being locally relevant. If I want to learn about new local restaurants, Facebook is the place they advertise. If I want to know whether Orlando has a hot air balloon festival this summer, that's where you go. I have no idea if we ever have a hot air balloon festival, but we probably do. There's a lot of hot air balloons. But that being said,
a lot of hot
Twitter,
air. No,
that's true too. Twitter has really struggled to figure out how to monetize, and that's partially because where there's good conversation, so I mentioned my conversation where people were throwing in, well, maybe Shake Shack's a better investment, or boy, I wish Chick-fil-A would go public. Well, if you serve me a Chick-fil-A ad there, that's actually not going to be all that useful. If you serve me an ad for a broker, that's probably not that useful for an experienced, investing group. So I think it's a little trickier for Twitter to make that connection where the ads come off as content, where they're really useful and feel like something you want. I think they'll get there. I think they're going to find a contextual way to do advertising that makes sense, but they're not there. And they're a competitor to Facebook the way you and I are a competitor, are a competitor to Bloomberg. Like it just doesn't. I don't think they register all that much.
Yeah, I just have to say, going back to the content conversation, I know you mentioned Netflix. We continue to have this. I think content is king, good content's king, but also the UI, these user interfaces, not great. And you would think that, a firm like Netflix, a company like Netflix or Amazon would be able to get it right in terms of organizing. I mean, what good is it having all this content if you can't sort through it and find it?
I think it's actually a giant problem.
Opportunity. I see it as an opportunity. Anyone who can figure that out.
It is. And we've talked a lot about this with TiVo, which I think did a pretty good job organizing content in their new hardware device that I think I might be the only person that bought. And I sent one to a colleague, so I know 2 of them were sold. But they have a partnership that was in partnership
Sorry.
with Roku. So I'd like to hope, because I want to know what content I have access to and when I have access to it. And I was traveling, and I didn't have access to my DVR, and I wasn't sure if I sent something to record, and I couldn't watch it live. And I wanted to know, do I have access to this content on any platform the next day? Does it air on Hulu? Does it air someplace I'm not thinking about? And I was able to figure it out, but it was a little too tricky. I'm also dealing with, I have a pretty terrible new cable company, way better than Comcast in terms of the service working, but the DVR is terrible. Nothing is intuitive, and I find it very tricky. So yeah, organizing content. Look, I find Netflix pretty useless. I'd get rid of Netflix if T-Mobile didn't pay for it and my wife and son didn't watch it, because I open it up and I'm like, where do I go? Whereas, on Disney Plus, I'm like, I like Star Wars. Is there anything new in Star Wars? Even HBO Max, which can be pretty tricky to navigate.
Oh yeah, that sucks too.
Yeah, but I know
Sucks.
I like DC Comics content, and that's a subsection. So that I could at least go to that subsection and find stuff. On Netflix, if you want to find like new 1-hour stand-up comedy specials, good luck to you.
Yeah.
You have to basically hire a Netflix Sherpa to come over and find stuff for you.
Netflix Sherpa. Oh, Dan, I think you should climb Mount Everest. All right, Dan. Always a pleasure chatting with you. Great thoughts as always, and look forward to having you back on again next week.
Yeah, Jeff, I max out at the 2 flights of stairs we have at our house. So.
Yeah, I'm with you. I don't think I could go the 5 miles above the Earth. Something like that.
I feel like the parade of dead bodies would be.
Oh man, that's a total turnoff. Anyway, we'll have to do a show on maybe mountain climbing gear or something to kind of tuck it back into that. Dan, enjoy the rest of your day. We'll talk to you again soon.
See you next week.
See you, bud. Welcome back. Now we're going to end the show on travel. Joining us on the line, he is the multifaceted reporter for MarketWatch. We're talking about Jacob Hassey. Jacob, great to talk to you, and you're a world traveler, and I know you want to talk about travel this morning. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing well too, sir. All things considered, it's a hot one here in Charlotte, North Carolina, but we're doing okay, and headed into the weekend and trying to relax and get gear up for the next week. I mean, that's all we can do. So what's top of mind? I mentioned you are the traveler, and you've got a lot of travel expertise. What's top of mind this week for you and the folks over at MarketWatch?
Totally. So a new ranking came out from a website called airlineratings.com, ranking the best airlines around the world. They did a top 20 list of the best airlines overall, and then a top 10 list, I believe, if I recall correctly, of the best budget airlines, low-cost carriers. And gotta say, for those booking trips, unfortunately, not too many American U.S.-based airlines scored too well. Only one U.S.-based airline cracked the top 10 of this list. It was United. So the list was kind of interesting. It's based on multiple factors. Obviously, their performance over the past year and the extent to which they took measures to protect travelers against COVID. That very much factored in. Reviews from travelers factored in, and then they also took into consideration innovation and how the various airlines around the world were pushing the envelope with the with the passenger experience and things like that. So United made the list largely because of an announcement they made last month, where they announced they are planning to purchase a fleet of supersonic Concorde-style jets and basically bring back supersonic air travel, which has been gone for a couple decades now since the Concorde went out of service. So United Airlines is planning to bring it back, and that got them on the top 10 list, but they were the only U.S. airline to make that top 10 list.
Jacob, before, after, during COVID, when was the polling done, and what are they, is there a time frame there?
Yeah, so I don't know that. I think it was based on the past year's worth of reviews. It was a list created by the editors of this website. So and the carriers that tops the list are some of the kind of usual suspects. So airlines like Emirates was ranked highly. Number one was Qatar Airways, and they are known for having a luxurious passenger experience. Air New Zealand was up there, or New Zealand Airlines, I forget exactly what it's called, but they were up there because of their COVID protocols. So it's Qantas, the national airline in Australia, which makes sense. New Zealand and Australia were probably some of the best faring countries when it came to COVID, and therefore it's not a surprise that their national airlines ranked highly on this list, since that was a major factor. Singapore Airlines also did well. They were ranked very highly in large part because they had the best first-class experience, according to this list. U.S. Airlines did better, though, on the second ranking, which was the 10 best airlines, low-cost airlines. So a number of U.S. carriers were on that list. That list wasn't ranked like the other list was. It was just a grouping, basically. But Southwest, JetBlue, and Frontier all made that list.
Yeah.
So if you're flying a budget carrier in the U.S., you're probably flying with one of the best in the world. But for other travel experiences, you might be better off going with an airline based in another part of the globe.
Jacob, do you think Emirates is going to be setting up domestic U.S. flights anytime soon that we can maybe to compete with with United and US Air and all these other? No, I'm kidding. I'm just playing with you.
No. I mean, it's definitely, but this is good to keep in mind, and it's good to read rankings like this because, it's, a way of kind of getting a sense of things. Everyone, I think, is looking to travel right now, and, we're seeing international travel open up a lot more as people get vaccinated. Although, again, because of the Delta variant, there's still some risk involved, and we're, now that the Olympics are happening, we're kind of seeing that all play out in real time, where we're seeing some athletes get sick. So traveling is not foolproof, even if you're vaccinated. But that's why it's important to fly with, an airline that is, has a reputation for its safety practices and things like that when you can. So, these sorts of rankings are helpful for that, especially if you take that into consideration with this year's edition of the list.
Jacob, are American consumers just less picky when it comes to the types of services they want? Is it really, you mentioned the balance list, and a lot of air carriers from the U.S. based in are on that list, and are we just a little bit more picky, or maybe we don't have the same, maybe picky is not the right word, maybe we don't have the same tastes, like, I don't travel first class unless someone upgrades me and gives me a ticket. But are we just like, hey, I just want to get from point A to B, like in a cattle car or a bus or a school bus, and what do you take away from all that in terms of the American? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no. It's a very interesting question. If I were to guess, the big difference I would say between the U.S. carriers, like United made the list, Delta was ranked in the top 20, as was one other airline, which I'm blanking on, two others, Hawaiian Airlines and Alaskan Airlines were both in the top, or all three of those were in the top 20. They just weren't in the top 10. Only United was. So, in terms of the comparisons between American Airlines, American-based airlines, I should say, and other airlines from around the world, a lot of our airlines are publicly traded companies. So they are beholden to shareholders, and I think that does. So while on one hand there is certainly a focus to compete in terms of the experience, because then you'll attract passengers. On the other hand, they, have to be very cost conscious, in perhaps a way that some of these other airlines don't, since they're often funded by those nations' governments or they're private companies. And so the kind of funding channel there is a little different. And, I think there's an extent to which, and not trying to paint too broad of a stroke here, but when you look at some of the Middle Eastern airlines in particular, they often are, viewed as having the best flight experience, especially for first and business class. And I think that possibly comes down to the fact that they take pride in their airlines and view it as kind of a reflection of their country. And so because they're not publicly traded companies in the same way that someone like United Airlines is. They can, justify spending money in different ways and don't have to worry about shareholders staging a revolt over their dividends and things like that they expect.
Yeah. That's a really good point. And, it's that myopia of quarterly returns that, putting your finance hat back on, we all deal with that, right? I mean, even stock buyers, they're looking at quarterly, you can have a long-term vision, but people, by and large, whether they have a long-term time horizon or a shorter time horizon, always focus on those quarterly earnings, and it's a bit of myopia I would offer.
I would agree.
Yeah. Well, I guess you and I aren't going to change that, but really interesting and always great to chat travel with you and real estate and personal finance and just life, Jacob. Jacob, enjoy the rest of your weekend, and we look forward to having you back again on the program very soon.
Talk soon. Take care.
Bye-bye, Jacob. And that wraps up this episode of BRN Sunday. Have a topic of interest, someone you think we should talk to, drop us a line. And don't forget, for all the information in retirement, markets, technology, personal finance, so much more, check out today's edition of our daily newsletter, The Morning Pulse. We're back again tomorrow, this time for BRN AM. We'll have some very interesting commentary and a very special guest. So until then, I'm Jeff Snyder. Stay safe, keep on saving, and don't forget, roll with the changes.